So welcome to DevOps KPIs, the key to successful digital strategy, part do. Featured in the share recording room. My name's Bill Mackey from CompuWare. Speaker today is Spencer Hallman from CompuWare. Before we begin, I gotta read this stuff. Sorry, guys. Sessions featured in this room are being recorded. If you're not interested in participating, please choose another session to attend. Attendees do not have permission to record the content on personal devices. Only the contracted videographer with Share Associate has permission to stream and record the content. This is a vendor presentation. Share Management has approved it based on the recommendation and review by program management. The Share canons, conducts, policies will be followed in this session. Specifically, a speaker must not engage in sales activity, including direct or indirect solicitation. You good with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay. And if there are any working members of the press in the audience, please identify yourself to the speaker. No, none of those. None of those. Spencer will be taking questions, so feel free to ask them. And please turn your cell phones off or place them in silent mode and mute the sound on your laptops and follow Share canons of conduct. Turn it over to Spencer Hallman.
Thanks. That's yours. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Spencer Hallman. I'm a product manager for CompuWare. And this session is DevOps KPIs, a key to a successful digital strategy, part 2. And so if you were here this morning, Bill sort of gave you a little bit of a groundwork of what we're trying to do. And today or this afternoon, I'm going to walk through some of the KPIs that we've identified based on the survey that we did with Forrester. And then talk a little bit about a strategy of employing those, and then show you some of the things that we've done internally. Okay, so first of all, how do we define success? Generally, success results in some sort of scoreboard. And think about it if, for example, you're the Icelandic baseball team, and you're the only team on the entire island of Iceland, and all you do all day is practice, and you practice. Every day for every day of the week, all you do is practice, and there's not another team to play. You really don't know how good of a baseball team you actually are. It's only until you get into an actual game against another team that you can actually start measuring yourself and see who are the, who's going to be able to, perform and who's not going to be able to perform. So we need something similar. You need a scoreboard to capture this information. And mainframe development is not too much different. We need a scoreboard in mainframe development as well to track what we're calling KPIs, key performance indicators. And being able to identify where, things that we're doing well and things that we're not doing so well that we can improve upon. Now, the likes of Google, Amazon, Netflix, they're already doing this today, and they're capturing this data, and they're looking at it, and they're figuring out how they can go faster and how they can do and deliver better code at the same time. So to do this, it's really all about measuring. So continuous improvement requires continuously challenging ourselves. And in order to continuously challenge ourselves, we have to continuously measure ourselves. And then to continuously measure ourselves, we have to continuously challenge ourselves. And so KPIs are what we're going to use to measure our productivity. So key performance indicators around development. So there's actually four areas that we look at for these key performance indicators. So quality, velocity, efficiency, and engagement. So quality is simply, how good or bad something is. I think we all have a pretty good handle on what quality is. And when we look at something, we can tell whether it's good or whether it's bad. If the phone's ringing off the hook because the customer's mad, we know that the quality is suffering. If the phone's not ringing, then hopefully quality is good. Velocity is measuring how much work we're getting done in a given period of time. So how many features are we developing? How many modules are we enhancing and moving to production? And then efficiency is measuring our ability to execute successfully without waste. And then finally, engagement. Overall, how engaged are the employees? And I think really to look at the last one there is what we're really trying to measure is the culture. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So these are some of the tools that we're going to sort of talk about here. I'm going to use the term ITSM, stands for IT Service Management. It may or may not, the tools that you use may not fit into that category, but I'm just going to use it as a general term. But some of these tools that fit in here are Jira, ServiceNow, Remedy, basically tools that are tracking your development efforts. So when we go out and we talk to customers about this, sometimes we say ITSM, sometimes we say, what tools are you actually using to measure your development efforts? Or so if you're going to develop a new feature in one of your applications, how are you going to do that and how are you going to track the efforts of that? So we try to figure out what tool they're actually using there. That may or may not be an ITSM tool. Or if a customer reports a bug or someone reports a bug, how do you track that? At CompuWare, we use a tool called Jira. Every customer we've talked to about 36 customers, and I would say that everybody seems to have their own method of tracking this information. Everything from a Lotus Notes database to ServiceNow and Jira. And then there's SCM. So for SCM, that stands for Source Code Management. So that's what you're using to manage your source code. It's what your developer will check the code out from. He'll put the enhancements or fix the bugs in that, and then he'll check the code back in. And so there's several there that our customers use: ISPW, ChangeMan, Endeavor, Git. These are some of the SCMs that our customers are using today. And so when I say SCM, that's generally I'm just referring to a group of SCM tools. So the first thing I want to talk about is quality. And Bill put this up earlier in his presentation. How important is it to track and improve quality? So roughly about 89% basically said it was very important to track quality. And I hope we would all agree with it, that quality is really important to track. And I think if you remember a couple decades ago, Ford used to go around telling, they had commercials out there that quality is job one. Poor quality can cause people not to use your product or want to buy your product. So quality is very important. And then for the second, we asked, does your organization track quality? So 73% said they're measuring that now. Very good. 21% said they weren't measuring it, but they could. And then the thing that we found really odd about this was that 6% said they weren't measuring it and they couldn't measure it. And then maybe they just couldn't, I don't know what they were thinking or what, there's probably a way for them to measure it, they just didn't realize that. But these are some of the KPIs, and I'll go into each one of these individually. So these are the set of the KPIs basically around quality that we're looking at. Now there might be additional KPIs around quality that you or your organization might want to track, and that's perfectly fine. When we started on this journey here, we had to pick basically a set of KPIs that we thought we could fill out at CompuWare and capture information on. So the first one I want to talk about is the ratio of regressions to modules deployed to production. And by regressions, you might also be, the term might also be fallback. So, every SCM seems to have a different terminology. So at CompuWare, we use the term regression. So what we're looking at is that, when you regress code, you're pulling it back to the development level from QA or for prod to address an issue that you found in testing. So high regressions may identify the need to do better testing earlier in the DevOps pipeline. So maybe, unit testing, if you're not doing unit testing, maybe that's something that could help you with the regressions. And how do we get this information? What we're doing is we're capturing the number of regressions and dividing that by the number of modules deployed to production, and that's giving us a percentage. So this is probably my favorite KPI, your ab-ends or defects, escape versus trapped. And I put defects up there because when I start talking about KPIs, a lot of times there's people not associated with the mainframe in the audience. And you start talking about Abend, and they look at you kind of funny, like, what the heck is an Abend? And we had a customer advisory council back in February with a bunch of our customers. And someone told me the story that afterwards, when we were talking about Abends, that they were furiously Googling what an Abend actually was, because they weren't coming from the mainframe side, they were coming from the distributed side of the house. So I always make sure to put Abends and defects up there as well. So as you're talking about these things with people in your organization, you want to make sure you talk their language too. So as a mainframe people, we talk about Abends. They might not understand what an Abend is. Even though it's been around for 40, 50 years, they still might not know exactly what that is. So an escaped Abend or escaped defect is something that's found in the production environment. And a trapped Abend is something that's captured in the pre-production environment. And so what we want to do is we want to find these Abends or these defects early in our system development lifecycle. We want to find them earlier on. And I think Accenture did a survey that it's about 8 to 10 times more costly to address a bug later on in the system development lifecycle than it is earlier on in the system development lifecycle. So the sooner you identify these bugs and address them, the less costly it is going to be for you to fix them. So some ways of you getting this information, log data, SMF records could be used to identify Abends. ITSM software can also be used for a source of bugs that are open due to customer interaction, or if your groups are testing and they're identifying bugs during the testing and they're putting those into an ITSM tool, that's another great source for this information. So this is really just a simple, percentage. So we take the number of escaped Abends, and then we divide that by the total Abends captured. So that would be divided by the escaped plus the trapped. So percentage of total programs using code coverage. And code coverage is sort of a generic term now, because CompuWare has a tool called code coverage. IBM has a tool called code coverage. There's some other tools out there. What they're doing is that they're looking to see what lines of code are actually being tested, and they're calling it code coverage as well. So as developers change the code, or they add new enhancements, or they fix things in the code, you want to make sure that what they are adding, that code that they're adding or they're addressing, is actually getting tested. If it's not getting tested and you're running the same automated tests over and over again, you're not really testing to see whatever enhancement they put in or whatever bug fix that they put in is actually working. So we want to make sure that they're using code coverage and they're testing that. So you want to look at the code coverage tool that you're using and figure out how to get the information out of that, so that you can present that data along with information in your SCM, determine what programs are actually being tested with code coverage as they go through the system development lifecycle. This is another one up here. When we first started talking to, looking at KPIs, we had a meeting with David. He was in the earlier session. He's the vice president of development. We talked to him and said, what do you do for KPIs? And he said the number one KPI that he looks at is the number of customer reported bugs, because that is his canary in the coal mine. If that starts to go up, and it starts to go up quickly, the CEO is going to be on the phone to him, or the head of customer support is going to be on the phone to him, and they're going to be, saying, what the heck are you doing? You need to improve your quality. So this is a great thing to be looking at as well. And so basically, export some data from your ITSM tool to identify, the number of bugs that your customers are reporting. Some of them may be unique, some of them may be duplicates, but ultimately it's kind of the canary in the coal mine of what your customers think about your product. Okay, so velocity. So going back to the survey that Bill talked a little bit about before, so how important is it to measure, track, and improve velocity? Again, 89% thought it was important to track quality. 87% I think it's important to track velocity. And does your organization track velocity? So 62% said that they do track velocity, 30% said that they could, but they didn't, and then 8% said that they're not measuring it now and they can't. So they don't know how to do it. And so what we did was we identified some basically a half dozen KPIs around velocity. So the first is, mean time from checkout to production. So this is when the developer goes in. Actually, So this is from when the developer goes in and he checks his code out, he does what he needs to do it, and he checks it back in, and that code then goes through a process to eventually get moved to production. And so this is kind of a good indicator of how quickly a module can be updated and moved back into production. It may be indicative if you're making large, complex changes with higher risk versus smaller changes with less risk. So smaller changes might have a lower mean time from checkout to production, whereas large, complex changes with lots of modules involved might have a longer time. We can get this information from our SCM. So the SCM can track for us when the developer checks that code out to the time that gets checked back into production. Number of features deployed. So this is if we're going to put in a new enhancement. So we want to add a new column to a report. We would call that a new feature. And there might be several modules associated with that we have to change to add that new column to the report. So what we're looking at is how many features a dev team is delivering, and we're looking at this on a monthly or a quarterly basis. We're not necessarily looking on this on a daily basis. We want to kind of aggregate this to either a biweekly, a monthly, or a quarterly basis. And our SCM will give us this data. It's all all the SCMs that I've looked at and the data that they provide back to me give us this information. And then the corollary of this is the number of modules deployed. So each feature is made up of one or more modules. And so what we want to look into is how big are these features that we're actually deploying into production that are being developed. And again, our SCM gives us this information. But what we want to understand is that if we're deploying large number of modules, we might want to look for some correlation of abends, right? So do we see, as we deploy large number of modules, does our quality start to suffer because of that? So, DevOps and Agile is all predicated on this whole, small changes moved in small increments, and that helps you to go faster and deliver better quality code. Versus, if you think of the waterfall method, is these large, complex features and enhancements that you're moving in a, every 3, 6, 9, 12-month process, which can have a lot more risk associated with them. So mean time to detect. Now this is mean time to detect a bug. So this is, what is the average time to detect a bug in production? So it's, so we're in August. So July 1st, for example, we put out a new release. When did we find that bug? If we find it today, our mean time to detect that bug was roughly, 6 weeks. So what we want to do is find out, to me, this is telling me how pervasive these bugs are that we might be finding. Are we finding them that, is it sort of a unique use case that a customer went through to find it, or are we finding them right away when that gets moved into production? And so if we're starting to see, short times, then maybe we need to do more unit testing and more automated testing on the back end before moving our code into production. So we're getting this data from our ITSM products, and also looking at our SCM data as well. So we're figuring out when that module is getting moved into production, when we're finding the bug, and then doing the math to figure out what that value is, and then coming up with an average. Mean time to repair. This is probably something I know people have been talking about for a really long time. So after we discover that bug, how long does it actually take us to repair or to recover from that bug? So basically it's saying, how quickly can we develop a fix and move that into production after we first identify that bug. This is basically what your customers are noticing. They're seeing that they reported the bug today, August 13th. When are they going to get it? When are they going to see a fix to that in production? Again, we can get this information from a couple places. The ITSM data is a really good place to get this from. So you can say, basically take, the ticket that the customer has opened, take the close date, subtract off the open date, and there's your mean time to recover or your mean time to repair. And then there's the mean time to develop. Just because we discover that bug today doesn't necessarily mean that our developers are going to start working on that bug this afternoon or tomorrow. They might not work on it for a couple of weeks, depending on how bad the bug actually is, what the priority of it is. So what we want to do is try to understand how long does it actually take the developers to fix the bug. Not necessarily the mean time to repair, because the mean time to repair is the time I identified the bug to the time that I've fixed the bug. The developers are going to fix the bug, right? And they're going to basically take the bug and they're going to fix it, but they might not start developing it for a week, developing that fix for a week. So what we want to do is understand, how quickly the developer can come up with a fix for the bug. So we can get that from our ITSM tools. That may give us the information on when they start working on that. I know in our version of Jira, we know when the developer starts working on a bug, and we track that. So efficiency. So how important is it to track and improve efficiency? And here it's 90% of our respondents, and this was, I think, 160 mainframe people that responded to the survey, said it was important to track and improve efficiency. And then when we look at, does your organization track efficiency, 61% said yes, they were tracking efficiency, whereas 30% said they weren't tracking efficiency, even though they think it's important, and 9% said they didn't know how to track efficiency, and they weren't. So these are the three, basically, things for efficiency that we're tracking: lead time, cycle time, and percentage of time spent on innovation, agile ceremonies, bugs, and other. So lead time. So what is this? This is, Bill comes up with an enhancement. He wants to put something into one of our products. So he used to be the product manager for FileAid. So Bill comes up with an idea of a new enhancement he wants to put in FileAid. So he goes and he creates a story or an epic to put that new enhancement in. And then that basically sits in the backlog until the developers start to work on that. And what we're measuring there is the time that the idea has been come up with and it's entered into the system to the time that we actually start working on it. And so what this is showing is how quickly we can create that story and start development on that. And so if it's taking you a long time to start working on stories or add new enhancements to your code, maybe you got to start looking back and saying no when people call you up and say, hey, I want you to put this new enhancement into your application. Because if you start adding all these enhancements that you might not ever get to, the lead time is going to be really long. So how do we capture that data? Simply from our ITSM tool. We measure from the time that the story is created to the time that it gets moved into the sprint for the first time, and that's our lead time. And then on the back end, there's the cycle time. So this is a time after development has finished working on the story. So they've done what they were supposed to do for that enhancement or for that feature or for that story. And then how long does that now take to get that enhanced code into production? So even though the developer has finished it, there's a process that has to go through. They don't just finish it. You guys don't just finish it and then go out to the SCM and say, okay, now I'm going to move it right into production. There's a process that we have to go through, right? There's a QA process that has to get taken care of. And then there's some other, red tape that has to take place. And Bill calls this our red tape KPI. So what we're really measuring here is the red tape. So how is your code getting moved to production? So how does it get approved to move to production? Is there some sort of, change advisory board or change acceptance board that every enhancement has to go through? Does somebody have to approve it, or can the developers themselves approve it? So this is what this is sort of looking at, and we can get this information from our SCM. We can see when the developer is checking the code back in from development to maybe to QA to the time that it actually gets moved to production, and that's your cycle time. So the percentage of time spent, and this is an interesting one because a lot of customers we talk to about this, they don't track their developers' time. At CompuWare, we tracked our developers' time because before the last tax law was put through, that there was a tax benefit to tracking the developers' time. So if your developers were working on new innovation, putting new enhancements into the product, you get a tax break for that. If the developer is working on a bug fix, you didn't get a tax benefit for that. You didn't get a tax break for that or a tax deduction. So it was important for us to be able to track how our developers were spending their time because, every April 15th, we were able to get some money back from the government based on that. So our developers will track their time, and they'll say, there's a product called Tempo that they go out to that they put their time and effort in. And we can even see this in Jira. We see how much time gets spent on an individual story. And you guys are smiling. And so what we're looking at here is trying to figure out where those development teams are spending their time. We don't care. This KPI doesn't care where the individual developer spends his time because a lot of people will look at this and say, wow, this is really too big brotherish. What we're trying to look at is trying to understand what the team is working on. Are they spending a lot of their time working on bug fixes? Are they doing new innovation? Every 2 weeks, we have a town hall at CompuWare where the whole company comes together for an hour and we talk about things that are important to the company. That's an hour of the development of all our developers' time that they don't actually develop. But that's information that goes into this that we get to see in this KPI. And if they're spending a lot of time in meetings, that means that that's time that they're not able to work on innovation or they're not able to work on bug fixes. And so we get this information from time tracking software if you use it. A consultant said to our CEO, nirvana here is to basically get access to people's Outlook calendars, and from the Outlook calendars, you can basically tell, where they're spending their time. I'm not advocating, going after individual people's Outlook calendars, but I'm just saying it's a possibility if you know how to do that. So engagement. This is the fourth KPI, and this is sort of trying to measure your culture. So the idea here is to give a survey, and it should be an anonymous survey with a short number of questions. And these are basically the half dozen questions that we ask on our survey. And it's just trying to find out how engaged your development teams are. It's not looking to find out how engaged Bill is. It's trying to figure out as a whole how the organization or how the development team is engaged. Because the engagement is going to affect velocity, quality, and efficiency. And why do we do this? Well, Gallup took a survey in 2017, and I think they do this on an annual basis. And this is what they found. They found that 33% of employees were engaged. These were highly involved people. They are enthusiastic about their work and workplace, that Monday morning, they're happy to come to work. 51% aren't engaged. They're psychically unattached to work in the company. Their engagement needs aren't being met. But basically, they're coming in, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and then they're going home. 16% are actively disengaged. They aren't just unhappy at work, they're resentful at work. And, so they may actually be working against the people that are highly engaged, that 33%. So they might be the ones that are actually sabotaging you. And so if you look at this, so 1/3 of the people are engaged, 2/3 of the organizations, and this is Gallup's numbers, have found that are not engaged or actively disengaged. And those are scary numbers. And there's a really good book out there. It's called Accelerate. It's by Nicole Forsgren, Gene Kim, and Jez Humble. I have that. I'll show you the name in a second. But they spend a chapter or two talking about culture and actually basically reinforcing this KPI. And we came up with this KPI before their book actually came out. And as I was reading that book, it's like, holy cow, like we're spot on with this, because when we came up with this KPI and started talking about it, there was a lot of resistance both within our organization about even talking about this KPI. But this is something that, you need to look, all organizations need to look at. They need to understand the type of culture that they have. And if they have a culture that's not going to help them move faster and deliver better code and be more competitive, then they need to look to see what they can do to change that. Okay, so a strategy. So going out and talking to, 3 dozen or so of our customers, some of the strategy that I've seen out there is that some of our customers are looking at what are their distributed teams doing. Your distributed teams may already be doing this. They may already have KPIs that they're tracking. I talked to one customer, and they had basically taken something similar to what we're doing, and they had moved it out to all their distributed teams. And they said that the highly engaged teams, the teams that were really good, they'd actually put it up on a monitor, and there was 4 or 5 KPIs that they were tracking, and they kept that monitor up in their work area so that they could see, how things were going, and when there was a problem, they could all react to it equally quickly. The teams that weren't moving so quickly, and these were distributed teams, not mainframe teams, they didn't want to put that dashboard up. But look at what those distributed teams are doing. What KPIs are they tracking? Can you piggyback off of that? And what technology are they using to track their project? So at CompuWare, we use, Bill sort of alluded to it a little bit earlier, we use the ELK stack. It stands for Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. It's an open source project that you can download and you can start using, and basically you throw data into it, and then you can start visualizing that data really easy with Kibana. Start small. Pick 3 or 4 KPIs that you know that you can track, that are going to be that you will successfully track, and they make sense for your business. Look for correlations in that data. So as you start to move things into production, how does that affect your bugs or your adbans? Do you start to see more bugs or adbans as you move things into production? And Kibana is really cool because it allows you to plot these things on the same visualization. So we've plotted moves to production, and also at the same time we're plotting adbans, so we can start to see if adbans are going up as we start to see moves of our modules to production. This has to be continuous too. This isn't a one-time only type of exercise. So we can't just decide, hey, we're going to do something for September 1st and then be done with it. We have to do this on a weekly or a monthly basis at a minimum. And this tool will help you create better, faster development teams. The idea isn't to identify development teams and basically hold a stick over their head. The idea is to identify the development teams and give them the feedback that they need to get better. This is some of the KPIs that we've captured at CompuWare using the Kibana interface. So you can see, we have one here, mean time to resolution was 38 days. And one of the things that we plotted alongside that on the right-hand side is the number of adbans. So we were looking for a correlation in the number of adbans to the mean time to resolution. If the mean time to resolution or the number of adbans is going up, do we see a corresponding increase to the mean time to resolution? We have deployment time. So how long is it taking us to actually deploy our code to production to production once it's been checked out? And it's taking us on average about 19.3 days. We work in 2-week sprints, so that works really. That number works pretty well because you can see that we're working on a 2-week sprint, and then it takes us another 4 or 5 days to move that stuff to production. And then finally, the number of bugs we're reporting on a daily basis. It's 10.61. So that's, one of the things that our vice president of development looks at. He wants to know the number of bugs that are getting reported. We have data from our SCM tool as well. So we're able to look at to see, what's getting moved into production, what applications are getting moved into production. And when one of our people looked at this, they saw this big, kind of blank area in this, and they went and they looked at this, and they found that was Christmas. So none of our developers worked on Christmas, and we were actually happy to see that. But you can see there's some big spikes up top there, and that was actually us moving some code into ISPW, our SCM, that had not been in ISPW earlier. So this was some of our newest acquisitions. We were taking their code and we're moving it into the SCM, and that's why you see those big spikes there. So these are, if you're interested in this and you want to do some further study on your own, number one book I would suggest to read is Accelerate, Building and Scaling High Performance Technology Organization by Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humboldt, and Gene Kim. It's a really good read, and it'll give you insight into the KPIs. And what they did was they went out and they did a lot of surveys of a lot of organizations. And they even looked at mainframe teams as well. So really good book to read. A couple more books that we've looked at is Leading the Transformation and Applying Agile and DevOps Principles at Scale. That's by Gary Groover and Tommy Mouser. And then Starting and Scaling DevOps in the Enterprise. Those are really 2 short books, and you could probably read those in a night or 2. They're really thin, but basically Gary Groover worked at HP, and he talks about his experience and basically taking the group, the development group that creates the firmware for printers, and moving them to Agile. So you think, moving, mainframe development teams to Agile is a difficult task. I mean, these are firmware developers. So he had a whole other set of problems to deal with that we don't have to look at. And then finally, just for DevOps in general, the Phoenix Project, that is a really, really easy read. And if you want to read anything, that is a really good book by Gene Kim and Kevin Bear. That I would suggest, spending, a couple of nights reading. Sometimes it hits really close to home with what you read, but it's really good, and it tells you why you need to move more. It gives you indications of why you should be going to an Agile from a waterfall method. Okay, so is there any questions? Okay, well, thanks very much.
Should a proper, finitely defined Agile methodology aid you in tracking KPIs?
Yes, I think you're right. Any finite defined Agile methodology, if you have the proper tools, you're going to capture that data, and you'll be able to get that data and then create those KPIs and track them. Yes. So yeah, a customer will call up and they'll report, is there a bug? And then, the first thing the support person will do the triage to figure out, is it a bug, or is it just, they didn't, implement something right? And then if it is a bug, then that results in a JIRA getting created. Or, the tech support person will also look back at the open JIRAs to understand, is there already a bug reported through this? And then they'll just put that customer's name on that. So there will only be one JIRA per unique bug.
So a lot of the tracking statistical basis can be done through the JIRA?
Yes. It's just getting the data out. Sometimes that's difficult. Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much.